Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SLT time. We've taken kind of a long hiatus to recover and rest over the new year, but we're back with season 3, and we're going in quite hard and heavy. Today, our topic is around trauma, and from your SLT time team, there's myself, Ilya, and there's Miriam, and we're joined by 2 lovely guests who will introduce themselves. So first, we have Melanie.
Hello, I'm Melanie Cross. I'm a speech and language therapist. I've worked for decades when I think about it with looked after children and children who have social, emotional and mental health needs. So I have thought a lot about trauma.
Brilliant. And we're joined by SLT veteran, Warda.
So I'm Warda. I have a social enterprise called Language Waves, which is all about delivering kind of holistic and culturally diverse therapy in my local community.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us today, both of you. So first of all, we kind of want to start by saying that some of the topics we're going to be talking about today are very deep, might be a bit intense, and they could be quite sensitive. So we're just going to put a little disclaimer, a little warning from now that some of these things might be upsetting to listen to. They might, spark different kinds of emotions. So if you want to stop listening, that's fine. But afterwards, if you need to speak to us or if you want to drop us any messages, we're always available here at SLT Time to speak. So like I said, today we're going to talk about trauma. This is a hugely broad topic and there is so many nuances and elements within that. So we're probably not even going to scratch the surface, but it's a conversation that we've all at SLT Time really wanted to start getting into because it really impacts us from ethnic minority families, and I don't think it's often considered enough in practice within our profession. On top of that, recently there was the Intergenerational Trauma Conference, which was hosted by Action Trauma organization, and Miriam and I both sort of attended it. It was virtual. And we kind of took a lot of information from there, which we will go into first. And then hopefully we can sort of go into a more natural discussion about that within speech therapy, that within SEMH, and everything related to that. So I'm going to hand over to Miriam now, who will give us more of a rundown about the conference.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Ilya. So I'm going to dive straight into it and sort of summarize some of the notes from really 2 videos and 2 speakers that I watched that I thought were really good and really relevant to our discussion. The first one was around speaking around race and trauma, and this was the speaker was Dr. Kenneth V. Hardy, and he basically summarized racial trauma as feeling of being reduced to an object instead of a person. And really the crux of it was that racial trauma is really a byproduct of oppressive conditions. And something that he said that really struck out to me was that this isn't something that we can see, and this isn't something that's really spoken about or really has a term in the wider language of trauma as a whole, but we can really see the scars if we look a little bit closely. So for example, if we think about Black women and that they're more likely to die during childbirth, or if we think about people from BAME communities, they're more vulnerable to COVID, or people from certain parts of the world are maybe more susceptible to diseases. We might not necessarily link trauma to that, but does that affect their predisposition to these sort of elements? And what I thought was really interesting was that these wounds of racial trauma are not only invisible to us as clinicians, but to the person, the child, the parent that's living with it themselves. And he split these wounds into a few different subgroups. So the first one was something that he called internalized devaluation, and that's basically that you're always told that you're less than. So if we think about the wider society and the messages that the children we work with or the adults that we work with are always sort of facing is that you're not, and we talked about this in previous episodes as well, that idea of thinking that you're not articulate enough, you're just less than everyone else, and these feelings become internalized, and this sort of leads to a distorted sense of self. So part of who I am is very heavily influenced by how other people perceive me. So finding it quite hard to actually understand who are we as people, but sort of linking that to what someone else thinking about the particular way that I'm speaking, or the particular way that I'm carrying myself outside, or the particular conversation that I'm having. The third sort of element that he speaks about is learnt voicelessness, and he said that this was very different to being quiet. So it's not having much to say, but it's that I'm not confident enough to speak my mind or to tell people how I'm feeling. I might be seen as a really angry person that's always, talking about the negative side of things. If I do speak about something that's on my mind, how would other people perceive it? I might get myself into a lot of trouble, whether physical or emotional, and really just having to think 100 times before even sort of communicating your thoughts to others. And he spoke about something that we've spoken about as well in SLT time before, and that's what he called psychological homelessness. So what is that child or that adult that we're working with, what is their sense of home? So if we think about what home is somewhere that you should feel safe all the time, or somewhere where you feel really comfortable and you're able to be yourself, you're able to express your thoughts. But a lot of people that face racial trauma don't necessarily feel safe. They feel too scared to express themselves. They might not trust the people that are around them or the people that are meant to protect them. And he described it as, in the sense of, I think he used, he was from America, so he spoke about feeling American but not American enough. But I think that's something that we can probably sort of easily attach to feeling British, but feeling British with quotations, or not feeling British enough. And I think that's something that we've spoke about before. And the important thing with that as well is that psychological homelessness is, for me, for example, I'm British, I'm Algerian, but whichever country you go to, you kind of don't feel like you 100% fit in, because you're sort of in the middle of both, and what that does to you in terms of thinking about who you are as an individual. So those are the main points that he sort of highlighted. And one of the other main points that he spoke about was every person that has faced racial trauma that's not from the sort of that's from like other backgrounds has probably faced racial trauma, whether they know it or not, or not being able to see that scars within themselves, and how we might work with people or adults or children that have faced that. So it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on those sorts of quite heavy sub points, and that are quite summarized as well.
I think because I watched that video as well, and you summarized it really, 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 really well, Miriam. But that point about the psychological homelessness, that was the phrase, right? It really, really hit home when I watched the video as well, because I really relate to that. And I think that there is a huge generation of first, second class, like migrant young people, diaspora now within our communities, particularly our peers like me, Miriam, and people from those similar backgrounds. And as the newly qualified and speech therapists who've been working for a while, what is our role in sort of understanding and accommodating for that? But there's I think over the episodes, what we've realized is that there's so much that you need to think and account for. And I think it's overwhelming, and people don't know what they should and shouldn't be doing. But the reason why I was interested in going through this topic is because the same way that we're accounting for social, emotional, and mental health is quite similar to how we would account for, I think, racial trauma and families from ethnic minority backgrounds, but they're not necessarily always put in the same context together, which is, that link is not made, which is interesting, I think, in research and stuff. Nobody thinks, you know what, this works in this context. Why does it not apply in this type of setting as well? I don't know.
I mean, I agree with you, because the reason why I do what I do is kind of because of that. Because I recognize that a lot of the young people in the families that I was working with were from these diverse backgrounds, and I could never really entirely provide a service that kind of catered to all these issues that were present, not just the child having a communication difficulty, but the parents having their own kinds of issues that were happening. And I was like, well, how can I make gains for the child's communication when, you know, the mum's not happy, the dad's not happy, something else is going on? There's all these barriers.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing at the end of the day, how much of a difference is it really making? And so when I was kind of, I call it the confines, but the confines of, you know, whoever I was employed by, it was, you know what, your role is a speech and language therapist. You assess, you give advice, and you give therapy. That's what we do. And I quickly realized, no, that's not all I want to do. You know, there's more I can do, because I have a whole bunch of skills that I've developed. So how can I provide a service that does all of that?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is kind of just listening to families and all the things that we, you know, take for granted, but having time, creating that space and building that rapport, finding out what somebody's story is, and then thinking, oh, actually, okay, now that makes sense, or now how does that apply to the child, and how, you know, how can I do all of that? So yeah, I don't want to keep talking about it, but it's really important, because I think you can address language, you can improve on it, but what's the point if it doesn't help the young person, and it doesn't help the family, and it doesn't improve their sense of self, their life skills, and their quality of life.
Yeah.
Like, what is the point of speech and language therapy if we can't do that? And at the end of the day, when I leave a session, if I've ticked a box, but I know I haven't really helped.
Yeah, I agree. I think that trauma or SEMH, all of these things really challenge us as a profession, because I mean, one of the things that I've learned from listening to all of you and really thinking about this, it's just reinforced all the ideas I've ever had about giving time, as you said, Warda, about, you know, being curious, really trying to understand all of that stuff. And it doesn't fit very easily into models of care and all of that kind of stuff. And it's also about having the opportunity to, yeah, it is. It's just, do you actually have the time that you need to give? Because you don't know what people are up against unless you have the time to build a relationship where they trust you, and then they can tell you some of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid and big point in terms of, can they trust you? And that doesn't come, you know, after just meeting them once or having like a 20-minute phone call with the parents or with the adult. That takes time. Yeah. And understanding why they might not trust you to start off with, I think, is really important. I think there was another video that I watched that really, I just watched it and I was like, wow, like I completely understand where the speaker was coming from. And it was around collective trauma, and this isn't something that I've come across before in terms of like the term. and he described, it was the speaker was Peter McBride, and he described how collective trauma can affect individuals. And he started speaking about our understanding of trauma to begin with, and how it really started off after World War I, and it was seen more as a physical element. For example, in World War I, they were talking about shell shock, so it was still seen as something that physically happened to people. And then after the Vietnam War, they started recognizing PTSD, and not only in relation, there are people that are diagnosed to have PTSD, but there's also people that live maybe with symptoms but not necessarily have a diagnosis because they don't meet the full criteria. But thinking about how an individual might always be on alert, and that's because they're ready to face a threatening experience, and this really becomes the norm even if the threat isn't there. And he spoke about lots of different groups that this has been studied on. For example, Bosnia, South Africa, and from the Holocaust as well. So people have experienced trauma, and then their group identity becomes pretty much trauma focused. And that experience of them being a victim becomes part of who they are as a person. So them thinking about, we are the people that were persecuted, this happened to us, and then that becomes really highly contagious and becomes their cultural identity. And that's, I guess, because I've read about intergenerational trauma, but I read about it more in terms of like epigenetics, and not necessarily just going down from family to family. But he spoke about how families actually start changing the way they bring up their children, and that's how it sort of gets passed down, because they're always on that sort of, maybe not fight or flight response, but that response of like, we need to protect ourselves in case something happens. And I just thought, wow, that's like, I can completely see it in terms of like the history in Algeria from the independence war. That's definitely there. That's definitely part of our culture, and it's something that people are not necessarily aware of. But that idea of from a young age, we know what happened in Algeria. We talk about the history of it, and it is that this is something that's happened to us, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. And people are always on alert, and I can like completely see that after watching that video. So I thought that was super interesting, because a lot of the children that well, I say children because I'm a peds therapist, but I'm sure it's relevant as well in adult therapy as well, but they have come from countries that have faced a lot of trauma, and
or still have facing trauma now.
Yeah, exactly. So something that's completely relevant, and I don't think I've really probably thought about it enough in terms of like dealing with them. So maybe not just the trust of maybe the parents, but even the child themselves, really, in terms of building that relationship with them.
Yeah, we've spoken before, I think, briefly about sort of your first assumptions when you meet a new family, and maybe they're not going along with your therapy, or they're a bit hostile to any of your suggestions, or and how often that can be perceived as the family not engaging and they're the ones who are at fault. But actually, just like you said, there is a deep rooted mistrust in healthcare, the system. The healthcare is the system, and who have really psychologically messed with and impacted on our communities. And I think collective trauma is a really good term, actually, because there is the sense of sort of even if the young kids that we work with don't really understand it, that heightened alertness state has sort of been ingrained in their upbringing. So naturally, you don't want to work with the teachers, you don't want to work with therapists. You're feeling me against the world type of energy. And I think when we talk about us as practitioners, it's just even that basic that really basic awareness that this could be a prerequisite with this family, and just considering it and opening up that thought, because this is, I think we keep talking about removing our biases and our assumptions, but this is where it's really relevant as practitioners, because you need to allow that space to build that trust for a lot of these families, and that needs to be a given. for practice. And it's not, and because like you said, Melanie, it's not, it doesn't fit into our frameworks. And when you qualify as an NQP, you're so busy worrying about doing the ABCDs that, you know, you're not, there's no space to think, oh, okay, I actually need to have 2 sessions maybe of just sitting and chatting with the family and making them understand that I'm here to help them. And I think that we need to be re-educating on how to deal with this, and allowing NQPs and students to sort of understand that there is going to be a lot of factors playing on families from these communities, and you just kind of have to be aware of it and flexible and try and work with it, basically.
Yeah. And I think more importantly, obviously I know we focus on our clients, but ourselves as well. So if we think about how does my whatever life experience I've had, whatever trauma that I've experienced, how do I turn up in the world? And how does that positively or negatively affect the relationships that I have with my clients, people that may be very similar to me or people that might be very different to me? So how am I kind of perceiving all of these situations, and how does my trauma, my experiences, my sense of self affect how I turn up? So I think yeah, it's really important that we do think about our clients and what we're doing with them, but also think about actually what's going on with us. And I think even us recognizing how certain situations make us feel, what our triggers are. So sometimes you have a trigger, you don't even know it's a trigger. And so that impacts on the judgments you make and how you treat somebody. So I think, I know there's a lot to get through in the course. They've got to make sure that you know your basics. But I think that kind of CPD development is a lot on us, learning more about ourselves, to be honest.
I think that's so important, because you know, we hear about post-traumatic stress disorder and toxic stress, but we don't always hear about post-traumatic growth. And a lot of people in the helping professions, because they have had difficult experiences themselves and they want to help. And that's an advantage, because they may well have developed, you know, skills in resilience that others wouldn't have had the opportunity to develop. But also, as you say, it's going to make you vulnerable, because there will be times when it's too close to the bone for you, and, you know, and it's hard.
I just started working in a special needs school in September, and we have a lot. I found it very difficult. I had a bit of a breakdown, like sort of 2 months in, where I was hearing these stories of these kids, and you know, reading it all on paper and just thinking, oh my gosh, like I really related on one level, but on another level, so many of these people who are from communities that are so similar to mine are experiencing these things. I just felt really emotional. I just sort of had a breakdown to my supervisor. But I think, like you said, recognizing our own trauma and our own sort of emotional involvement in this is really important as well. And often we're not, I mean, the generation above us, I'm speaking from my experience, my parents would never admit to that trauma. I think we now have a kind of collective responsibility to address it and try to heal it. So we're not sort of perpetuating this collective trauma mentality. But that's obviously a huge task for us, and we don't always have spaces to do that, and we don't really develop those skills. And whether that's the purpose of going down a healthcare route, should they be supporting us to do that? I'm not sure. Like, it's a lot. But I do think that, it needs to be sort of a journey that our generation are sort of going down now, especially us who are in healthcare and recognizing these things and having these conversations.
It's interesting that you say that about your parents, because a lot of people that I work with from West African backgrounds or etc. Believe in this thing called a generational curse. So a generational curse is basically the trauma that you're speaking about. But instead of recognizing it as a trauma that's happened throughout the generations, it's seen as a curse, as in, you know, this consistent bad luck. So whether it's having a mental health issue or having a child with a disability or a need, it's almost like I am cursed. My mom was cursed. My grandmother was cursed. We have a generational curse on us. So people tend to kind of carry that with them, the guilt, the blame, and educating them on kind of like that trauma, or how these things happen has been really important to kind of create relationships and break down those beliefs. Because it's almost like, no, there is no, you're not cursed. And it might sound silly to a lot of people, but if you have a culture where you're heavily tied to your faith, or there are specific things that come down in a line, you do believe in these things, regardless of if anybody thinks it's silly or not, and you really do internalize it. And once you internalize the belief, you do kind of see it manifesting in your life, because it's just like, oh, bad luck. So I think it is really important.
But I think the number one question that I feel with all of this is, because obviously, Warda, you felt like when you were managed by somebody else, you weren't able to work with the families in the way that you felt that you were most needed. But say your newly qualified speech therapist wants to go and do speech and language therapy work. Just in terms of just putting the question out there, what is our role in all of this, and where is the line between what we as speech therapists are doing for these families versus what is actually expected for us within our remit? And it's kind of a blurred line because of how ingrained what we do is with psychology and community and family. And I think it's a question that people who listen to these kind of conversations think, like, what should I be doing? Is that really, am I meant to be doing that? Am I qualified for that? Can I have these conversations? Am I just meant to be doing what I was taught in my modules? And I think, that's kind of something that we need to explore as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what you lot think, but to me, that's like a deeper philosophical question of what is the purpose of what I do, and what is my skill set. So, of course, not everybody's going to be cut out to do things in a different way or a new way. That's fine. That's why we're all very different, and that's why we all have very different specialisms. So that's okay. But I also find that there's this thing about, I'm NQP. I have 10 years experience, I have 20 years experience, and it's like this kind of hierarchy of, if I become band 6 and then that means this, and if I become band 7, and I personally don't agree with that. I do think that, yes, cut your teeth, get your experience, seek supervision and mentorship, but also find your way, believe in what you're doing. Because I think it's that kind of like as a student, you go through this whole system of validation. I got a 2-1, I got a first. What does that mean? I'm a good therapist? No, it doesn't. In my opinion, it doesn't. So it's kind of about people just having that faith in themselves. And if there's anything that you don't know, there's plenty of people that you can go to, and they will help you and they will help guide you. I don't know what you think, Melanie.
Yeah, I think that is true. And when I started, I was kind of given a key to the clinic, and off you go. So we, in the dark ages, we didn't have care pathways and all the rest of it. And I used to do things like, I remember this one woman coming with all her children in the buggy, and I put them all in the car and I took her home. And because it just seemed like the thing to do, but actually, that kind of stuff is harder now. And I think your gut instincts, there's all sorts of intellectual stuff about, what are my competencies and all the rest of it, but your gut instincts tell you, because essentially what we're talking about here is being a good human, being a kind human. Surely that is within our remit. And there are complicated things that we can try and do, but there are also some really basic fundamental things that we can do, which are about trying to make somebody feel safe, listen to them, and do the best we can. We can't solve everything, but we can do something. I don't know if that...
Yeah, I always, one of the things that Dr. Hardy spoke about was just he spoke about some of the therapy, and actually one of the main things was just to validate others. So especially if we think about that internalized de-evaluation that he spoke of, so just having that space where you just evaluate what that person is doing, validate what that person is doing or how they're feeling. And I don't know if it's not something that I've come across before, but I was even looking at things like just taking, just things that you can do in your sessions, I guess, that don't take that much time, but just spending that time to validate the things that they're doing really well and celebrate that as well, and sort of trying to counter all of that negative messages that they're always getting, maybe by choosing the resources that you're using more wisely, or just verbally validating them. I think is something that would go a long way. I don't know if there's anything else out there that we could be using as well.
Well, I think that's it, because it's about, theoretically it's called hostile attribution bias, what you're all talking about. And, it's a very reasonable mindset to be in, given what some people are experiencing. And it's no good saying, oh, no, you're fine, everything's actually lovely, because it isn't. But what we can do is gently challenge the kind of that mindset when it's voiced. I'm thinking about children that I've worked with who would, call themselves terrible things, and to say no, you're wrong isn't helpful. But to say, well, I think of you as quite a kind person because I saw you pick up his bag when it fell on the floor. Just in quite a subtle way. It's not a contradictory thing, but it's a gentle sort of little challenge to some of those negative views. And it can be hugely powerful, because you may be the first and only person who's ever really given them a different perspective on themselves.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm working with anybody or a family, it's like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you work in something doesn't have any housing, or there's something going on, domestic violence,
exactly,
they have nothing to eat. Now's not the time to say, here, take this parent-child interaction, here, do this, do that. It's kind of like common sense. It's like, am I piling on to a house in a collapse?
This is the thing. It's not always common sense. I think this needs to be taught. And I think it's second nature to people like us. Like, we're here and having this conversation because we have these thoughts. But this is what I meant when I said earlier, like, a lot of people do just go through these healthcare courses and, have absorbed textbook type of ways of implementing care. And so these kind of things of, I shouldn't be doing this right now because I need to be working at this level. We're not actually explicitly taught that, like, as part of our training. And I think that it needs to be, because it's not second nature and it's not common sense for a lot of people. And that's for me, when I realized that, because I saw it in practice more often than I saw the other kind of train of thought, then that was when I was shocked and I was like, this needs to change.
If one of our first questions is, what do you need now? How can I help you? Then if, as Warda says, if it's, well, actually, I don't know where we're going to sleep tonight, that's going to change the conversation, isn't it?
But then I do also understand people being under pressure. So speech and language therapists being under pressure to see X amount of children and X amount of sessions, and so you can't say I spent the whole day helping somebody with their housing.
No, I get that. I completely get that. But my impression of what you're trying to do is to get people to think a bit more broadly.
No, I agree.
And that's where you will see the real changes at that level, a broader level. If we're not accounting for that kind of stuff, like you said, and if I didn't spend that whole day helping this child sort out their housing, then they long term, those changes, that they wouldn't see them as much. I think that's where you see the change.
Yeah, and I suppose it is that kind of confidence level. So for example, if you are newly qualified, you might feel, you're right, you might feel, actually my role is, I've been told I need to do A, B, and C. So if I do that, everyone's going to think I'm not good at my job.
Yeah.
And I think that's where having a supervisor or a clinical lead that's like a really understanding person comes into it. So if you have someone like that on your team, or someone like that is your employer, I think you would feel more free to kind of do you.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, like another buzzword that is thrown around is trauma-informed practice. But often it's only really used or understood when you're working in like youth offending settings or specific SEMH schools. But I thought it would be good to kind of explore what does this mean, and what does that look like in practice, and how can we sort of apply it now that we've kind of realized that, you know, ethnic minority families and children are experiencing so many different variants of trauma. How can we be using that more generally across our profession? Because I hear that term all the time, but I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what that meant for me as a speech therapist. Like it's so not explored enough, I think.
Well, I guess one of the things to me it should mean is that there is an awareness when there's a behaviour that's unexpected, that you're thinking, because you're not always going to know. You know, kids don't come with a label, I have been traumatized. It could be anybody, anywhere, in any situation. You know, that's the figures on it are shocking. You know, some very sort of close friends of mine, and you know, I didn't know until one day there was a complete sort of breakdown. So I think it's a sort of a mindset that, you know, okay, if this child or this person behaves in a way that I really didn't expect, maybe that's what it is. And again, I need to be open to that. And certainly, you know, in terms of children in schools, even in mainstream schools, taking a kind of behaviourist or punitive approach is really not going to help. So that's the key thing for me, that it's that kind of, again, a mindset about, I'm wondering now whether this is perhaps because of some sort of, you know, very, I don't know, toxic stress or traumatic situations child has been in.
I think sometimes school is the trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And this is what I mean, is because everything that you just said there, I feel like is completely relevant in my setting, but I'm not explicitly told to think in a trauma-informed mindset with the kids that I work with. And I think, yeah, we all should sort of go into that direction a bit more, because it's completely relevant across all settings, even with adults. I know we all come from PED backgrounds, but
yeah, I have a case at the moment where there's this young boy with severe communication difficulties, and you know, all of these needs are being taken as bad behaviour, and so he's been, you know, penalised for everything, banned from all kinds of extracurricular activities, being perceived to be rude and angry when really he's frustrated and can't communicate. And you know, it's one of those things, I think, when adults aren't careful with what they say about children or how they treat children, and they have kind of ultimate power over it, can't express or communicate, I think that's huge trauma.
Yeah,
that makes me so angry.
Yeah.
It's like when you talk about the child being angry, like, that makes me really angry.
Yeah,
so much.
Yeah. So yeah, I think school is a, you know, I never really liked school, but I think it's a major trauma center where you're labelled, you get told if you're good enough, you get told if you're bad enough, your grades make you. And I think for a lot of people, I definitely carry that with me. So I know the impact schools and teachers can have on you, and I know the impact that a good teacher can have as well.
And one of my lasting memories when I first started working with quite sort of traumatised and stressed children was when they were being restrained or held, or whatever you want to call it, and looking at that and thinking, that can't be right.
Yeah.
And there's now research about how re-traumatizing some of that stuff can be. Obviously sometimes it's the only thing you can do, but I do see a change in that. I think that there's a bit more awareness of being more careful about how we sort of deal with children or young people when they're very, very distressed. Yeah. But so there's that one extreme, but there's also that stuff which again I completely appreciate, that that kind of nasty comment for a teacher that you remember for years and years and years. And if for some children that's actually a daily, hourly experience, how that builds up.
And also children who are learning English when they move here, how traumatic is it when you go and you have these expectations in new school, and you're expected to already just integrate into the curriculum? You're still adjusting to the system here. That's traumatic, and that kind of inferiority complex that stays with you for life.
I'm always struck by that. The neuroscience of actually every rejection is felt in the same part of the brain as where you feel physical pain. And it's, when you talk about microaggressions, that this stuff builds up. It's every little moment when, people are not responding to you in a positive way. It has a massive impact.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it's children see that happen to their parents all the time, and the effect that has on that parents, on their parents. And then again, that changes their behavior in terms of how they would behave, because they would expect the same sort of response as well. But I just think that like that validating how children feel, and really sort of just doing a 180 on the descriptors that they might get, would probably do them like a world of good, in terms of like someone being really positive in terms of how they're presenting, or the skills that they have, just to try to sort of counteract all of that negative messages that they're always getting.
I think also just our curiosity and actually being willing to listen. That's probably the most powerful thing that we've got.
I think that's a huge takeaway message from this conversation. Just the impact that your intention for curiosity and the space that you provide and the time that you provide has on people who've experienced any form of trauma is huge, and we really, really need to make that sort of a practice norm, I think, across our profession.
Yeah, I think with lockdown and like working from home a lot, we've been working with parents a lot more, and I think that's really helped, because you have a better chance of building that relationship, whereas before you'd sort of go into schools and see the children, and you don't really interact with the parents that much, apart from once a year, and that's if you do go to the annual review. So it's trying to build that relationship, I think, makes a massive difference in terms of just being someone that's trusted for the whole family, really, and that they know that you're on their side.
Parents feel much more involved right now because they have to facilitate the session. And I think, I agree. It's been really, I've been face to face now, but last time I was more online, and you could definitely feel the sort of ownership and sort of, excitement that came with being actually the person that had to facilitate this for their child a bit more, and seeing exactly what happens, because they're always listening in the back of the room. And I think it's been really nice. And like Warda said, like, it's a whole family effort when you're working with a child. It's not just about the child's communication needs. So I think, that has definitely been one of the nice outcomes of COVID, I think, as well.
Exactly.
Yes, silver linings.
well, you've got to look on the bright side, I suppose.
Yeah.
But also just like trying to hold on to those positives. We know we can do it. We can do a video call and interact with the whole family. So we need to keep doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I would love it if that was more of a norm.
I feel like it's a really hard topic to sort of like pinpoint to one thing. It's more of your whole approach, isn't it, to therapy and to your interactions. So it's quite hard to be like, this is the answer, this is what you need to do. It's just thinking about our mindset when we approach all our tasks as speech therapists, I think.
Yeah, I think that was really why we wanted to have this conversation, is just to get that train of thought going in some people's minds who might not have thought trauma is anything that, I'm not working in that setting, I'm not working with any kids who have experienced trauma, I don't need to worry about it. But I think, what we've kind of revealed today is that it comes in all shapes and forms and sizes and terminologies, and we all need to be sort of adapting a more trauma-informed practice with everybody we work in, regardless of their settings, just sort of removing the assumption that that's not going to pre-exist is really important. So shall
we end with maybe like, if we have like top tips or something, Melanie, or if there's like one thing that you would say for someone to keep in mind or to really try and look out for or do more of, maybe?
Well, I suppose it's about keeping it in mind that it's a possibility, and there's always more things that we can learn and read about, and just kind of there's fantastic resources out there. So yeah, I think I agree that it's something we all need to know about and understand as much as we can about.
Agree with Melanie, and it's also, there are no answers. Literally, you're going to have a go. It might work, it might not work. There is no perfect solution or answer, but it is just about ultimately just having a go and talking to people as well. So talking to all your colleagues or other people, because I think that's where I've had the most growth. Just talking to other people and figuring things out from that perspective has really helped me. So don't ever be afraid to just ask somebody something.
Definitely. And sorry, I thought another one, which is actually the people who experience this stuff are the experts in it, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's not like we've got to provide solutions, but saying things like, "Goodness, how do you manage with that?" Or "I'm amazed how you seem like you're very skilled in dealing with things that are pretty tricky." And often, they kind of got a lot of the answers.
And I think also we'd be surprised how emotionally intelligent some of the kids we work with are as well, and being able to have those conversations in a different form maybe with them about, this sounds really difficult for you. How does that make you feel? How do you deal with that when you're experiencing this? And just because they're a child, not shying away from that, because you'd be really surprised kind of what they're able to pick up on from a young age.
Some of them are.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, both of you. I think, like Melanie mentioned, there is a bunch of resources, and I know that you have a lot of resources out there as well. So maybe we can add some links to the tweet, and so we can share those out with people as well if anybody has anything to add on to that. Thank you both for joining us today.
Yes,
it was a bit of a heavy. Now I think afterwards go on TV and have a coffee and relax. But yeah, it was really interesting, and I think we got lots of take-home messages, and I think lots of food for thought for people who are listening. So it was really great. So that is the end of our first episode of season 3, and I'm not sure when the next one will be. We're sort of taking it. We're taking it this year. We're also prepping for the Anti-Racism Forum event that's happening in May. We're all involved with that in some shape or form. So shamelessly going to plug that out there. Make sure that you sign up for the event that's in May, and listen out for the pre-event videos, which are releasing every week with the Royal College. So great. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Be sure to follow our Twitter and our Instagram,
SLT Time,
at SLT Time.
SLT Time, to keep up to date with new episode releases.
and that's the SLT for today.